Doctors of Reddit, what is the funniest thing you've heard someone say while under the effects of anesthesia? I took care of an 11-year-old boy in the ER a little while back. I gave him ketamine for a fracture reduction, or in other words setting and splinting of a broken bone. As he was coming around he started with typical stream of consciousness babbling, and then he seemed to snap awake to say, I'm frickin' I'm gonna do so many drugs when I get older, to the amusement of his parents. They thought it was funny and cute, but I'm pretty sure I created a monster. I'm generally a pretty even-keeled guy, basically never feel anxious, but when I had my knee surgery they gave me a Valium because they give one to just about everyone. Man, I did not know it was possible to feel that calm. I totally get why people get hooked on that stuff, and how if you got used to that level of serenity it'd be hard to come back down. Told this story before, but surgeon here was doing varicose veins surgery on a very posh middle-aged lady. Very cut class accent. There was an anesthetic that we used that sometimes induced some hallucinations, either going under or coming out of anesthesia, and heard some funny things. Anyway, this lady was in recovery, just coming out of the anesthetic. The team were around waiting for her to wake up and gag a little on the tube in her throat for breathing. So we knew it was time to remove it. She gagged, we removed the tube. She smacked her lips and said loudly, in her incredible accent, "That's the best bit of dong I have had in years." The whole recovery room just fell about laughing. Luckily she didn't remember it. Not a doctor, but my dad had been given the goofy juice and was about to be wheeled into surgery. He looks at the anesthesiologist and asks, "Will the nurses have big titties?" My mom and his mom were in the room, laughing hysterically. The anesthesiologist chuckled and said, "Okay, yeah, you're ready for surgery." I mean, that would concern me too. When I woke from having my wisdom teeth removed, I asked the nurse to take me to the beach and release me back into the ocean so I could be with my people. She kept refusing, so I started accusing her of fiddling with me whilst I was asleep. I ended up getting moved to a different recovery area, where I was then asked to be quiet because I thought I was listening to Nicki Minaj, but in fact it was just me slaughtering the lyrics to an imaginary beat. Slaughtering the lyrics to an imaginary beat. Amazing. While having dental work done under the influence of laughing gas, I, female, mid-teens at the time, tried very hard to flirt with the, also female, married, dentist. I was not in any way subtle. She was not at all amused. Awkward. Also, not anesthesia but dilaudid. I called my husband from the ER once, rambling about how totally amazing it was that we have fingers, they're so helpful, and they're like, always there. They're like little friends that you get to carry around with you everywhere. It didn't take him too long to figure out they had me high as a kite, but he was super confused at first. I got my wisdom teeth out too. Had an IV. For the first time, I was 16 yo. All I remember was feeling great. I mean seriously amazing. When I sorta came to, I remember asking how much longer till it's over, and they said we're done. The nurse brought me out to the car with my parents, and helped me out to the car, and on the car ride home I asked why the nurse was so friendly. My parents told me that I confessed my love for short-haired brunettes, and that she would be my wife because she was perfect and I loved her. Haha, I had no game at the time. If it makes you feel better, I told my 60-year-old surgeon I loved him. When my sister had her wisdom teeth out a few years previously, she also told him she loved him. Dr. F must think we're a weird family. I had a lump removed from my boob a few years ago. The table they had me on was shaped like a T, so my arms were outstretched. As I was passing out, I said to the nurses, "I feel like Jesus." They had to tell me about it when I awoke. I sang "You Are My Sunshine" at the top of my lungs while being wheeled into the recovery room after my knee surgery. My dad, along with my now ex-husband, could hear me clear across the other end of the hallway, even through the snickers and giggles of the nurses. The surgeon still calls me Sunshine when we see each other around town. Your town must be really small if you manage to bump into your surgeon. Not a doctor but an EMT. When I was doing my clinical rotations, there was a lady who was in a room yelling about how she knows who she is. She stated her full name, age, height, weight, where she was and why. I thought she was completely lucid until she started shouting, "I ain't no prostitute, but can I sell this pee?" There was another guy that also seemed pretty lucid in the emergency room, but then he said, "Can someone tell Emmy why the guy next to Emmy is pregnant? It's freaking Emmy out." We had the same family doctor for over 45 years. He actually delivered me, some 60 odd years ago, when I was a middle-aged man myself. During my very last checkup before he was to retire, he invited me into his private office, where he took half an hour to reminisce and laugh with me about a bunch of family stuff. He informed me that I had actually been one of his very first solo deliveries as a young attending, and that he had been a little nervous on my mom's behalf. He reminded me that by all indications, I has promised to be a rather tricky delivery. I was a week overdue. I was her first pregnancy. I was a pretty large baby, 9.5 lbs. That mom was a very tiny woman, and that she had already been in labor with me for more than 24 hours. He told me he had been about to suggest to mom that a cesarean might be in order, when I suddenly decided it was time to bust a move. Mom had had a funny reaction to her epidural, and between that and sheer exhaustion from her lengthy labor, the doc could tell that she was fading in and out of lucidity during my actual delivery, which took a while even after I had become motivated. And in addition to all the other complications, early in the process the doctor had also needed to digitally coax me into the perfect position to make my grand entrance. Lucid or not, mom certainly remembered that part of the procedure, because according to the doctor, just after he'd cut my cord, and before she had fully come round again, my dishcloth limp, sweat-drenched, exhausted mother, normally a very gentle, unaggressive and soft-spoken woman, had suddenly grabbed him by his upper arm with a grip of steel, heaved herself halfway off the table, locked eyes with him from about 6 inches away, and yelled, "Did you eld? Did 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 you eld?" Doc chuckled that the mat nurse had had to leave the delivery room for a bit at that point, because she'd peed herself a little, so he ended up washing me off and wrapping me up in a receiving blanket himself. To the end of her days, mom's steadfast claim was that she has absolutely no recollection of ever saying anything like that to him, and was horrified by the possibility that she had. Nonetheless, Doc told me that this was that incident that had made mom, and me, two of his very favorite patients. That's freaking hilarious. On the other side, when I got my tonsils removed, the doctor said we call this Jackson juice, as he hooked up the anesthesia to the IV, because this is what Michael Jackson killed himself with. I then woke up with no tonsils. We gave that to a guy for a dislocated shoulder so we could get it back in. Dude's heart rate went from 140 to 35 in about 2 minutes. I understand why MJ died on it. When I woke up from surgery, I was hitting on all the nurses. Young, old, man, woman, didn't matter. Everyone got called beautiful that day. Captain Jack Harkness, nice to meet you. Not me, but my friend got knocked unconscious and hurt her neck, so they gave her some pain medications. When they took her for a CT, she was asking why, and the nurse told her they had to take a picture of her brain, and she asked if she should smile. That's cute as crap. My boyfriend, as he was being wheeled into recovery, yelled to me, "Honey, you can call me Shrek from now on." He has no idea why he wanted me to call him Shrek. I had to have surgery a few months later, and when I had woken up, I called my boyfriend on the hospital phone and told him he could call me Fiona from now on. After I got my teeth removed and woke up, I had an uncontrollable urge to drive. I had recently got my permit. I was like, "Let me drive, I want to go." My mom had to physically restrain me by putting her forearm against my throat against a wall. The nurse also had to help restrain me. I cooled down after like 5 minutes of this. I recently had open heart surgery. When you wake up, they give you a heart-shaped pillow to hold onto and put pressure on your chest, which feels amazing. When I woke up, I threw the pillow at my mum and told her that whoever came up with that idea was the most ridiculous person, and screaming that no one wants something on their chest after it's been broken. That pillow ended up being my favorite thing, and I kept it with me 24/7 for a couple of weeks. Haha, I remember that. After I woke up from my open heart surgery, I apparently demanded to see my father, and when he moved into view, I glared at him and said, "You freaking lied to me. This hurts like a mother." Not a doctor, but my girlfriend broke her ankle pretty badly in April. I showed up in the ER shortly after she'd arrived and had to step out briefly so that the nurses could set the bones back. They had to give her something pretty intense for the pain. Believe it was ketamine. I came back in after it was done, and hilarity ensued. She forgot repeatedly that she'd even broken her ankle. She constantly worried that she was swearing too much. There was a little boy in the next bed, which she was not. She thought that reality had broken and that there were 8 universes all at once. Yeah, ketamine makes you trip. I bet she had a great time. Not a doctor, but a roller derby girl who witnessed teammate break their leg. When the paramedics gave her the whistle of pain relief, she went from screaming in pain to saying, "I hope that cute paramedic has to cut off my pants cause he might like what he sees," made more hilarious by the fact she is married act. When I woke up after my appendectomy, my mom says that I couldn't stop talking about how I no longer was wearing underwear. I then proceeded to tell every person who came to see me in the hospital that I was not wearing underwear for the next 8 hours. I had surgery for endometriosis. Sucked, but it is what it is. So there I am, just coming out of the anesthesia, and my hands are just going everywhere, like they have a mind of their own. I was rubbing my face and mumbling, and then I felt an itch by my pubic area. So naturally I tried to scratch it. I then realized that they shaved my pubes. I began crying and moaning about how my pubes were gone, that it was going to take forever to grow them back, and that I really missed them. At one point I believe I was sobbing that they needed to put them back on me. I'm really fun after surgeries and epidurals. I remember another one like that in another thread. A Scottish guy got his pubes shaved me his operation and said something along the lines of, "Dad shaved me pubes." Obligatory, not a doctor, but when my friend woke up from general anesthesia after his kidney stone removal surgery, he turned to the anesthesiologist, locked eyes, and dead straight mumbled, "Did you break my dongus?" The poor guy has to excuse himself from the room. He was laughing so hard. Never came back. My friend's sister was slowly waking up after a surgery and was still a bit out of it from the meds. Her family came into the room and asked how she was feeling, and her response was, "I feel fine, but man, that nurse is a bee," as the nurse was standing next to her. Luckily the nurse was able to laugh about it with them. I was on a crap ton of laughing gas and deluded after a nearly botched C-section with my youngest kid, and told the nurse she was a T-barnacle and gave the poor girl the finger. My mom said she laughed about it, but I guess I was mad and thought they were laughing at me. I was apparently angry because I couldn't have spaghetti right that second. When I got my tonsils removed, I woke up from my anesthesia in the general post-op area. It took me a while to wake up, but when I did, from some reason just started yelling, "I am alive. I am alive," and want hash browns and not stopping. I had to get out into a private room because other patients and families were getting worried about a patient yelling, "I am alive. I am alive, alive, alive," with bits of "who has hash browns." I eventually started pronouncing hash browns into hasher browns. The nurses were trying to keep me from yelling because I just got my tonsils removed and said I would be in a lot more pain if I did not stop yelling. This made me yell more. They were both concerned but also laughing so hard they had to leave the room. From what my boyfriend told me, I was in so much pain when the drugs wore off. LPT. Do not yell after tonsillectomy. TLDR. After tonsil surgery, screamed, "I am alive. I am alive," and want hash browns. Had to be wheeled to private post-op room because I was scaring patients and families. When I got appendicitis, they gave me Dilaudid because it felt like someone was trying to burn a sharp bulb out of my lower stomach. I remember going from screaming, crying from the pain, to telling my boyfriend I feel like I am being hugged by a cloud, which is what I thought I said, but in reality he said I just murmured cloud hugs. He did a WTF face and then said I starting swaying side to side with my arms crossed saying cloud hugs and humming. TLDR. Got appendicitis while on Dilaudid. Tried to tell my boyfriend I feel like I am being hugged by a cloud, but in reality had my arms crossed while swaying said cloud hugs. Not a doctor, but My best friend broke his collarbone and here is a list of the best things he said. We walk into the emergency room and he is saying hello to everyone, then he sees this nurse and blurts out, "Wow, you are very attractive." Anytime we were alone together he would whisper, moreover yelled in a whisper to me about how much he wanted to frick this girl he had a crush on. Do you think lunch boxes are sad when they are empty? Crap man, I'm so freaking frisky. The ambulance driver was sitting right next to him when he said this. I love my grandmother so much, she is so lovely. Have you met her? Wow, she is great. He was talking to a nurse, not me. Oh my god, the lunch boxes. Underwent a procedure that required sedation with ketamine. I screamed for half an hour in the post-op area. I scared the patients and fought off the staff. Little 5 foot tall me. When I stopped tripping, the staff told me that they had to use enough sedatives and I ordered to take down a grown man 3 times my size. What I've gotten so far from this thread. Ketamine is crazy crap. My mom has a sort of cute one. After a recent surgery she woke up crying and asking for my dad. 31 years of marriage and still stupid in love with each other. There's a cute video online where a woman goes in to see her husband after surgery. He tells her that she's the most beautiful person he's ever seen, not aware that she's his wife. She breaks the news that they are married and he says, "I hit the jackpot." Apparently when I was getting my septum fixed, I yelled at the doctor for lying to me about how the stuff prior to the anesthesia would taste. That was not a banana. You liar. Have you eaten a banana before? Then post surgery I reportedly burst into tears over a particularly heartwarming episode of In the Night Garden because the Tombliboos couldn't find their toothbrushes. My dad thought this was all great fun. Finally was abandoned by family, at which point I asked some poor nurse to give me my phone, and everyone in my recent contacts list got selfies, focused on my nose, followed by messages about how these drugs were finny. I was 21. Had my gallbladder removed. Pre-surgery I'm a nervous wreck. I just could not stop talking. I explained, in detail, about how I'm bad with pain and will possibly need more pain meds as a result. However, acknowledged that I have no professional training and would trust their judgments. They'd given me something to prevent blood clots and something else. Turns out that something else was something to help me relax and it had turned me into a chatterbox. When I had 2 molars removed, the first one shattered, or something, and a specialist had to be called in. I was high as a kite and he's introduced himself as Dr. Jesse whatever. I've internalized my hello, pleasure to meet you in verbalized Hannah science. B. Instead of doing things the other way around. I also remember being really proud of myself for breathing, because I was told for over an hour, while high, that I was doing a good job of breathing. Upvote for Hannah science. B totally made my morning. Not a doctor, but I woke up in recovery because someone was moaning. Me, a doctor, was bent over the patient next to me. I was patting his butt saying, "It's okay, you're waking up, it's okay shhhh." Patient with history of drug and alcohol abuse heavily sedated on intensive care unit. This is the best freaking party I've ever been to. Mostly not doctors, but who am I to be left behind by the bandwagon? When I got my wisdom teeth out, the only thing I recall was trying to signal to the nurse to use the saliva suction thing. But since I was drugged up and my mouth was full of surgical tools, I decided to sign language fingerspell, the closest word I could think of, which was vacuum, over and over. I spelled it wrong. Props for doing something sort of intelligent. After I got my wisdom teeth out, I lined up all the health food cereal and knocked it onto the floor while crying out, "This is bird food, mom." I mean, you're not wrong. I had an abdominal surgery and as soon as I woke up the doctor wasn't showing me pictures of my insides and talking to me. As most of you know, the first time you wake up is not the only time. Every time I woke up I asked to see the pictures. Finally at about the 8th time I asked my mom if the doctor had been in and she let me know she was counting how often I wanted to see them. Not very exciting, but just a constant "Is it done? Let me see." After I had my wisdom teeth out I asked if I could paint butterflies on the mailbox. I don't know why. Sorry, not a doctor, but this was shortly after I got my wisdom teeth out. I was apparently fine, at home, going to get in bed, and I called my then boyfriend in a panic because there was a small town on my blanket and I didn't want to crush it. Like most, not a doctor, but when I was given something right before I was wheeled in for a colonoscopy and upper GI scope, I loudly threw the hall with patience. Told the nurse to warn the doctor that the internet had led me to believe my butthole was slightly higher than normal, and I was concerned he would get lost. I was heavily mocked after the procedure, and totally deserved every moment of it. This one is probably my favorite. I can't stop laughing. Not a doctor, but I kept asking if this was the stuff followed by oh yeah this is the stuff. The stuff was what they give you before anesthesia. When they brought me in the OR and went to put the mask on me I pushed them away and asked is this the stuff that puts me to sleep. They said no but proceeded to put the mask on and my last words to them were, in a giggly voice, MHMM. Okay, bye. The stuff you referred to made me silly drunk. Apparently when the surgical team asked me to scoot from the gurney onto the operating table, I complained that, not only was this spa's service subpar, but those were definitely not 500 thread count cotton sateen sheets. Then when they put the mask on I said it smelled like vanilla. I had a surgery a few months back and my mum said that when I was being wheeled to the recovery room I kept shouting marijuana is the spice of life at everyone. The profit we need. This happened to me a few years ago and my twin sister will never let me live it down. I had just been put under for getting my wisdom teeth extracted. Apparently, when I woke up, I told the cab driver on the way home that we had to go to a pet store. No exceptions. My twin and taxi driver were so intrigued that they just let me do this. When we arrived at the pet store, I opened the door and ran to the chinchillas. I spent the next 20 minutes or so petting and whispering to the chinchillas like a club kid on an ecstasy cocktail. Then my sister dragged me out. Taxi driver had turned off the meter and was laughing in the pet store with my sister, watching me, and she had the taxi guy drive us home. I got my appendix taken out, and the doctor told me to say goodbye to my wife before the surgery. She said I love you. I said I know. She did not find it that funny. The doctor chuckled though. I'm surprised your wife didn't stick you in carbonite. Was getting tonsils removed I think, and put under anesthesia, and the dentist was wearing one of those colorful shirts with butterflies on it. I apparently was super into those butterflies and poked her breasts the entire operation saying what pretty butterflies. Somehow, mom was semi-impressed. I recently got surgery on my foot and while I was still high my mother recorded me saying things like, where's my freaking foot? Mom, the communist took my foot. Where's my foot? All I have is a snub. Those freaking communists took my foot and left me with a snub. I got pee because they didn't have Coke but dad Pepsi. Pepsi? Who the fricking heck drinks Pepsi? Frick Pepsi. Called the nurse Samantha. Her name was Brittany. Yelled nobody named Susan. Claimed to have 9 children, Apollo and Dante being my favorite 2, and Susan being my least favorite child who I have locked in the basement. We don't have a basement. Cried because I had to pee and sang a parody version of Set Me Free from the TV show The Get Down called Let Me Pee. Cried because I wanted fricking chicken nuggets. When asked how I was going to eat them because I was high I said something about ripping them up into pieces and putting them in a bowl of honey mustard then I'll eat it like soup. You had me at let me pee. D. Had an operation on my nose. Woke up post-surgery high as a kite. As the nurse talked me into consciousness I proceeded to tell her how I am planning to propose to my boyfriend. The first I had heard of this. She kindly told me how sweet I was, at which point I began to hit on her by telling her how stunningly beautiful she was. I'm gay. Finally, my time to shine. When I was 13 I was in ICU for a long time and was just coming out of a coma when this occurred. For reference, I was just about the shyest kid you'd ever meet. Obviously I don't remember this but it's been confirmed by my mother and plenty of nurses that at one point, not long after waking up from my coma, I sat straight up, looked my nurse in the eye and said, "Hey you, I'm gonna frick your boyfriend later. Also should be noted I'm a lesbian." Looks like I'm the only doctor who has responded to this so far. For general anesthesia and even conscious sedation, people don't usually say funny things. Most people's funny comment stories are from being on pain medications, which is analgesia, not anesthesia. I literally sedate people all the time and they just pass out. Now, people with hospital delirium. Those stories are funny. Doctors, nurses, and hospital staff of Reddit, what are your experiences? Funny, sad, horrible, with people waking from anesthesia? NSW. Was the patient in this one? When I was 12 I had heart surgery and was getting wheeled down to the operating room. I was completely transfixed on my knee when I then asked a nurse if I could pet the kitty. She said sure, so I started petting and scratching my knee going AWW, good kitty kitty. When I woke up from that surgery I spent about 5 days in anesthetic, heck, like a medically induced coma but not quite as severe, and cussed out every nurse that asked me how I was doing. I was intubated so I had to scratch out my hatred onto scrap paper and hope they could translate it. When I was off of the cocktail they were giving me I was back to my cheerful self and felt mortified about calling the pretty nurses working the ICU ward at Children's Hospital a bunch of stupidity. Apparently it happens all the time but I still cringe when I think about it. As an EMT who deals with the nurses at Children's, that might explain some of their surliness. 3 times. The first time when I was 5, tonsil surgery. My family is from Norway, and my grandmother always kept a pewter model of a longboat on her mantle. Just to explain why a 5-year-old would wake up screaming, "Get me back to the longboat," and then apparently, to quote my mother, go all Linda Blair on the doctors when they came in to try to give me antibiotics. That was nearly 25 years ago and my family still likes to joke about me managing to shriek my head off and throw punches after having just come out of throat surgery. By age 13, I'd tamed down some, and apparently only muttered angrily at everyone while waking up. Age 26, all the fight had gone out of me, and I just cried whenever a nurse asked me a question. "How is your pain? Not bad. I'm so sorry." "Don't be sorry. Can you sit up for me?" Uncontrollable sobbing. "Okay then, let's get you some apple juice." Fully disconsolate. Got my wisdom teeth out 2 weeks ago and all I could do was cry. I tried sitting there focusing on not crying but every time my dad looked at me I started to bawl, and when the doctor asked me how I was doing I burst into tears and laughed at the same time. In 91 I had my appendix out but there was a complication. Instead of being inflamed and ready to burst, they found my appendix dead and shriveled. The poison in my appendix had drained to my lymph nodes in the center of my stomach. The doctor doing the surgery had to feel around to find where to make the second incision. Problem is that I was in the operating room for so long I built up a tolerance to the anesthesia that I woke up. As I started to sit up with 2 huge holes in my stomach all hands came out of me and a nurse forced my head down making me look at the ceiling. I thought this was a dream from the meds they gave me but my doctor later confirmed that this actually happened. The anesthesiologist decided to up the dosage on the anesthesia to an adult level, then double an adult level and I finally fell back asleep. Because of the high dosage they gave me my arms and legs twitched and I almost turned over on my side with 2 huge holes in my stomach. They had to grab straps and strap me down to the bed including my head. I do not remember it but the doctor, who was my family doctor until the day he died, told me that I woke up 3 more times during the operation and one time I saw my open wounds and freaked the heck out. After that they strapped my head to the table. The anesthesiologist refused to give me any larger dosages of the meds because he was at the danger levels for an adult. I was a child and it was not working on me. Ever since then I have had to be prescribed large dosages of anything or it will not work. Dental work has to be done with both a local and gas as well. Because of this, with the exception of heartburn meds and antibiotics, medicine is something I usually do not take because it does not work on me well unless I take illegal doses. My 11-year-old daughter woke up crying after foot surgery because she felt bad for Luigi. When I asked her why, she said because no one ever wants to be him when they play. I have a nice sister of a friend story. She was getting her wisdom teeth removed, and after they took them out, they just sewed up the holes they were in. Now, she came out of anesthesia, but she was still groggy and like, super high. While they were in the car going home, she reached into her mouth, touched the stumps and got blood on her fingers, and then reached up and gave her the double football stripe look, pulled her blanket over her head, and said, "I'm a warrior." The friend who told me this was laughing for a good 5 minutes after she told me this. Just thought I might share. My brother had knee surgery done, and at the time was running his own business and was stressed out. When he was coming off the anesthesia, he was trying to get out of bed and demanding to let him go because he had to get back to work. It took 3 nurses to hold him down to convince him to stay in bed. The sad and funny thing is, he remembered the whole thing, but he said it was like he felt he couldn't stop himself. Needless to say, he was really embarrassed the rest of his hospital stay. I'm not the medical professional in this story. My husband had emergency surgery a few years ago, and when he woke up, he was just different. I can't explain it. He recognized who I was, but his personality was completely different and the way he spoke to me was completely different. It's sort of like in movies where people wake up in someone else's body. It freaked me the frick out. 36 hours later, it was like he just woke up and was himself again. The weird part is, he had no memory of the past 36 hours. He remembers being sick and he remembers the emergency room, but after that, nothing. A lot of people came to visit him in that time period too. A bunch of family and everyone from the office, and he has no memory of any of them. The only thing I can think is that whatever medication that was used in the anesthesia that gawked him finally worked its way out of his system. Thank you for the new verb, to gawk. I had an endoscopy performed and was put into a twilight sedation. When I woke up, I barely remember sitting in the recovery area. I heard the beeping from my monitor. I started to shake, and my wife freaked out and called in the nurses thinking I was having some type of seizure or something. I was just trying to make the beeping go faster by shaking. While on fentanyl for gallstones in the ear, I asked the ultrasound tech if she wanted to take a selfie with me. She declined and I got butthurt about it. Apparently I also told my sweet grandmother, when asked if I was okay, that I was fine gran. I'm high as giraffe balls. 2011 I had a hernia surgery. Don't remember this but was told I woke up exclaiming how f***ed up I was. Wanted to know what they had given me and if I could purchase some. I'm a nurse on a post-op floor and this type of comment is pretty common. I had my wisdom teeth removed about a month ago and apparently when I woke up I said wowie. That's some good crap. I was coming around from surgery and the nurse who was looking after me had a crush on a guy I dated when I first started nursing, several years before. It was rather surreal to go from deep sleep to talking about an ex-boyfriend I had hardly thought about in years. I almost feel it was an abuse of her power. I could have said anything coming out. You don't expect to be interrogated about a past relationship the first thing waking up from major surgery. In the end I found out some gossip. The relationship didn't last long and apparently he was hurt that I wasn't devastated when we broke up and that I started dating someone new within a few weeks. Slightly different in that it wasn't anesthesia, but rather sedative meds. I worked in a hospital years ago, and once had a patient who had an extreme paradoxical reaction, opposite of what is expected, to her Ambien. She went off the rails. She started hallucinating that she was in a hostage situation with a man who was killing babies. One nurse went in the middle of the night while doing her rounds and the patient attacked her with a folded wire hanger and severely beat her in the face and head. The nurse ended up with multiple broken bones in her face, blacked both eyes, and a number of deep wounds on her face. She was gone for a while on workman's comp but eventually quit, stating the experience had traumatized her and she didn't want to be in the building again. Don't know whatever happened to the patient but I doubt she would have been punished or charged, since she was not in her right state of mind and nobody expected such a reaction to the medicine. I was just going under and was barely conscious but my mother asked me how many fingers am I holding, so I replied by lifting my middle finger and saying no mom, how many fingers am I holding up? I woke up from knee surgery and demanded a vodka and coke with no ice. Also for some reason when I woke up I was freezing cold and shivering. One of the nurses hooked me up to some heater which blew warm air under the covers from the bottom of the bed. I then likened myself to Marilyn Monroe. I'm a 6'2" athletic guy. Heater which blew warm air under the covers from the bottom of the bed. What a fancy hospital. Got wisdom teeth out 1 month after my dad died. Woke up and asked where he was. Thought he was picking me up. My mom had a rough time with that one. Crap man. My surgeon told me that when I was waking up from anesthesia, he was walking past my bed and I yelled out as loud as I could. Thanks for not killing me, Dr. Smith. Name changed. He later told me it really made his day and he'll never forget it. I'd like to seize this chance to say sorry to that poor guy who was around when I woke up. First thing I said was, I got a puke and I did so generously while he helped me suffer through this. Then I looked at him and said, "What's your name?" I don't know what he answered, because he reminded me of a friend of my sister. So I told him, "Well, you look more like a Tobias to me." He laughed and said that I look like a Hugo to him then. My dizzy mind then thought it was nice to say, "So does your mom." Then I laughed and puked again. I fell asleep soon after and another nurse was there when they brought me back to my room, so I never got the chance to apologize. While it's a good story, I still feel a little embarrassed. Can just hope that guy has seen worse. If I was that dude, I would chuckle for years to come. We had a cute little guy, 6YO, who was getting his arm set in emerg after a pretty big playground full. He'd been waiting patiently for about 3 hours, was a super trooper all through the x-rays, the IV, and while we get him set up on monitors, they were talking about how he wouldn't remember the doctors putting his bones back in place because of the meds and how he'd probably have funny dreams from them too, so he should think of something good right before we gave them. Having taken care of him all shift, and knowing how hungry this kid was, he was restricted from eating till he was in the cast. I said, "You like hamburgers, right? Maybe mom and dad can take you to McDonald's when you're done as a treat." The dad was like, "Yeah, cool buddy, we'll do that. Just get this all done first." So we push the special K and the kid conks out. The is a bit difficult. It was radial ulnar snap a couple inches below the wrist. Big fush from a height almost an S shape. He was only out for about 10-15 minutes and came awake after that but was still partly under for a good while. The mom and dad were rubbing his shoulders getting ready to go as soon as he was up and able. When they asked him if he had any dreams he said kind of drunkenly, "Hamburgers dancing." It's much cuter when said by a heroic sleepy 6-year-old. Not at hospital staff, but my grandma recently had to get anesthesia. When she woke up she went paranoid and thought that the doctors and nurses wanted to kill her to harvest her organs. We had to try to explain to her that at her age, there wasn't much that would be worth it. Many elderly people, especially those with a baseline of dementia, have adverse reactions to anesthesia. They are frequently cooky for a few days. Also, interestingly enough, they can still harvest organs from the elderly. The lifelink rep at my hospital says she has had some organs taken from people as old as 90. Got told the story. When I was 8, I got a knee surgery. While on anesthesia, the travel between my hospital room and the OR tough, I was in a Formula 1 car. So I would make all the noise, telling people to faster, make the sound of the tires too. The guys told my mom it was the funniest transfer they ever had. Everybody was laughing, including people in the hallway. Obligatory, not a doctor, but I've gotten anesthesia a bunch of times. I only have vague memories of waking up from it, but I imagine the nurse's favorite from me is the time that I convinced my nurse that I spoke Russian and could help her translate the one phrase she knew. In reality, I had taken like 2 semesters of Russian, but still had a very limited vocab. I still wanted to get my flirt game on though. The only thing I could think of as the patient was that I surprised a lot of nurses with how quickly I shook off the anesthetic. I would be walking around an hour later and getting changed ready to go home. They just look dumbfounded. I am one of those people as well. I wake up quite easily like I'd just had a nap or something. I'm also quite difficult to put out and hard to keep under. I don't fight it or resist it. It's like my body just shrugs it off. I shadowed a surgery once with this guy who woke up saying, "Give it to me straight, doc. Will I ever play the piano again?" All of us were cracking up and he then goes, "Oh, wait, I don't know how to play the piano." Ha 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 ha, this one made me laugh. Woke up from a 2-hour reconstructive surgery on my ear. They had removed most of the skin between my ear and my head, opened it like a door and built me a new eardrum. As soon as I woke up, I had to clean. So I started walking around the ward in my assless gown, trailing an IV, and looking for stuff to throw away. Nurse was not amused, but I refused to stop cleaning. She gave me a piece of paper and told me to throw this away then go back to bed. I agreed. Also, what's with everyone being put under for wisdom teeth removal? I had mine yanked. Then I drove home 15 minutes later. A lot of times, doctors will try to pull wisdom teeth early, before they cause too much impaction. If they haven't broken the gum surface yet, it's a pretty involved oral surgery that can take a long time. Also, some people are wimps. This will get buried, but I feel compelled to share anyways. I went in to get all 4 of my wisdom teeth pulled, and they used light anesthesia on me because I did not want to be awake in any way. The first thing I remember when I came out was my girlfriend at the time, and 3 nurses laughing hysterically. I didn't know what was going on. They kept saying to me, "Sing us your song. Sing us the song." And I kept asking what song. My girlfriend says, "They told me all about the body condom midget lover song you kept singing. I want to hear." Supposedly when I first woke up, they asked who had brought me in for the surgery. "You aren't allowed to drive away after anesthesia done." And I responded something to the effect of, "My midget." They couldn't believe it, but I was adamant that my midget had brought me. I then began to sing a song called Body Condom Midget Lover, which I don't remember a single word of. So one nurse went out into the waiting room and started looking for a little person. Of course there was no little person, so they just asked, "Who brought Madison for surgery?" I guess they were shocked when a normal woman walked up and said, "Me." Unfortunately, I still can't remember that song, but I hope all those nurses never forgot it. TLDR woke up from anesthesia telling the nurses a midget brought me for surgery, and proceeded to sing a song Body Condom Midget Lover, which I never sang before. I had ingrown canines. They were basically growing sideways in the roof of my mouth. Anyways, once I woke up, my wife, who was then my girlfriend, had to leave the dentist office to go to the bathroom or something before we left. Anyways, when she was leaving, I started singing Baby Come Back. I did this with a hole in the roof of my mouth where they were trying to pull my canines out through 2 missing baby canines which were just removed, and under a crap ton of anesthesia while my mouth was filled with blood. So, needless to say, I had quite the lisp. She said it was both the cutest and scariest thing I had ever done. I was the patient in this one, but I was having a squint corrected by surgery when I was 5. They gave me anesthesia, but it just made me more and more hyper. I was bouncing around the little cot they'd put me in as the doctor said to my mum, "I don't understand. He should be going to sleep." The bit I remember clear as day was when, with my surgery window about to close, they switched drugs and pinned me down with a mask on. In my memory it is super violent and traumatic. I'm sure it wasn't, but they were wearing masks and I was a kid and basically became terrified of doctors for a while. A lot of sedatives and anesthetics have the complete opposite effect when given to kids. They get hyper and excited rather than sleepy. I had an appendectomy when I was 17, 1987. When I woke up after surgery, I was singing Wild Thing very loudly, but I was still under a bit, so I hadn't tried to open my eyes or sit up. When I finally did wake up, I couldn't see at all. I was screaming, "I'm blind. I can't see." And my mom and dad were in the room with me thinking I was indeed blind from the anesthesia. The doctor eventually came in and explained that this happens sometimes and it can take a bit for eyesight to return. It took 30 minutes and the entire time I really thought I was never going to see again. Then to make matters worse, I was in horrible pain and the nurse said, "We will get you a shot really quick." While giving me the shot, I started to speak and then the Demerol hit me and I threw up everywhere. I was home after having my wisdom teeth removed and I asked my dad for a bottle of water. I still had the gauze in my mouth, so I couldn't close my mouth all the way to swallow. So of course, water dribbled down my chin. The water was red from the blood, but my drug-induced mind thought, "Oh my gosh, I just drank water and it came out red like wine. Wine like Jesus. I'm Jesus, yeah." My very religious father didn't take this too well, lol. Who also had the 3 heart monitor patches on me still, and when I felt them, they were pointy. So again, my drug-induced mind thought, where did these extra nipples come from? Oh crap, I have 5 nipples now. Patient here. Had to be gassed when I got my wisdom teeth removed. Apparently my jaw needed some kinda jiggering, so they doped me really well. Luckily my wife was there to keep contained. When I came out of surgery, I apparently called the nurses cold bags, probably for being rude, and tried to cheer them up by singing the Adventure Time theme song with a mouth full of gauze and blood. This is assumption by the way, as my wife had to fill in the gaps in my memory, but what followed kinda confirms things. The nurses, fed up with my attempts to soothe them, told me to pipe down and handed me a whiteboard with a marker. This is how I was meant to talk for the next while. I took some artistic liberties and drew my best Jake and Finn for them and kept trying to stop the nurses as they rushed past me so I could show them my drawing. Nobody stopped, so I sat there weeping and smiling, unsure what I was supposed to feel. I was quite a sight. A 6-foot tall heavily tattooed child smiling and crying like a doofus in his wheelchair, hoping the nurses he insulted would be proud of his artwork. I did a 3-day internship at a vet in 8th grade, and I got to watch them operate, mostly castration neutering, and one time they brought in a wild cat, like a European one, so it looked just like a house cat with weird markings. It was oddly tame, and let me touch it. It also had only 3 legs. The last one had got stuck in a trap, and was in for some infection, had gotten stuck in another trap, so we got the needles ready, well, the vet did, and it was fine, until the vet injected it. It must have hated needles, because it started literally running as Cyril's ABD hissing. They got it in a net eventually, but it still wouldn't calm down. They doubled the dose, then tripled it. Finally it nodded off, but still kept waking up very so often to glare at us. After the operation it went back to being nearly tame, let me pet it, gave me a nuzzle and was released the next day. Late to the party, but when I got my wisdom teeth out, I managed to get 2 people in the recovery room to sing Christmas carols with me. I also argued with the nurse about my singing. In my defense, it was the 26th of December. Code browns are pretty common. Patients crapping themselves during anesthesia or on emergence. One of my patients who was in lithotomy position for a gyn procedure, vulvectomy, started wiggling a bit. The surgeon was positioned between the patient's legs, putting a wound vac on, and was almost done, so I had turned off the anesthetic. Well, she ended up squirting a dark brown streak of poop up the surgeon's gown and up her mask. Surgeon was less that pleased. I told her she should have finished up faster and that I was sorry, but I ran out of quarters for the anesthesia machine. Older female patient was sedated and we were just starting her colonoscopy. As the surgeon began putting the scope in her bum, she sleepily swatted her hand towards her behind and said, "Not now, John." We all just looked at each other and started cracking up. Anesthesiologists over it. What's the most disturbing thing you've heard from a sedated patient? My mom was getting knee surgery, woke up in the middle and said, "Whoa, hold up. I am not even wearing any underwear," then they knocked her out again. Whenever I come across the phrase knocked out, my mind always going to blackjacking someone over the back of the head. A story my dad often tells, there was an elder woman getting a colonoscopy under sedation, and when it started she said, "Harold, is that you?" Reverse, was going under for an emergency D&C and my anesthesiologist had a Russian accent, and the last thing he said to me in his very deep and menacing Russian voice whilst towering over my head at a staggering 6'7" was, "Now you go night night." I bet he did that on purpose just to see the terror in your eyes. I was coming out of anesthesia for an arthroscopy and I tried to rename the nurse assigned to keep an eye on me. I asked him what his name was, and when he told me his name was Scott, I said, "Mike." "No, Scott." "So, your name is Mike." "My name is Scott." "Mike, Scott, number." Middle-aged man coming out of anesthesia for a hemorrhoidectomy. "Now that you've seen my butthole, I think it's only fair that I see yours." Fair trade. I came out of anesthesia in a hospital dress. For some reason I decided I couldn't breathe. The dress was too tight and needed more air. I unlaced the front of it and let my boobs hang out. I sighed happily and stared into the distance, gently drooling. A nurse happened to walk by a minute later and offered to kindly adjust me after she saw an old man who was about to go into surgery, gawking at me. I looked at her and slurred, "Okay, probably the best thing he will see today." She chuckled and fixed me up anyway. "Your writing skills are excellent. The detail of gently drooling is goddamn delicious." When I was 13, I went to see my dad in the hospital as he woke up from what had almost become a full-blown diabetic coma. When he saw my family, he gestured for my brother to come closer, then whispered, "The nurse told me not to lift large objects, but I need to use the restroom." Then he turned to me and said, you are one big, fat Mexican. Proof that dad jokes are biologically ingrained. Former anesthesia tech. Nothing menacing, but a lot of you really don't like your spouses and make sure to let the room know right before you pass out. This is really sad. I had a couple of patients bark, but I think the worst patient was the one who was sedated for an x-ray who suddenly sat up and tried to bite my face off. He got more drugs. I'm a veterinary anesthetist if that makes any difference. Apparently after shoulder surgery I was coming out of my drug-induced coma. The nurse went to shift my blankets. My hospital gown must have moved and uncovered my junk. She just smiled and moved the blankets back over me. Apparently I looked at her. I said, you saw mine. Now let's see yours. Now, I don't remember any of this. I had to hear about it from my wife, who was sitting in the chair next to the bed. Once my mom had surgery, and when she was waking up from the anesthesia and on a whim decided to frick with my dad, so as she was regaining consciousness she bleary looked at my dad and said, who are you? My dad didn't take it well, but she still laughs about it to this day. That's hilarious. I'm doing this if I ever have surgery. As a patient, as I was going under for a colonoscopy, I'm terrified I'm going to poop on you. As I was waking up from a surgery I had a panic attack and started screaming how it was never going to end, and then went back to sleep. I had a panic attack like that after LASIK. I was in so much pain writing and kicking on the floor of my closet, pitch black, no windows, and screaming that it was never going to end. My soul later tells me that this is how I act when I get blackout drunk sometimes. I'm a nurse, but this happened to me as a patient. Bit gross. But here goes. I had a terrible tonsil infection and it abscessed, and it was occluding my airway. It was so incredibly painful, and I was breathing like Darth Vader. The docs were going to try to manually drain the infection from the tonsil to open my airway and avoid a tracheostomy. I was terrified. They gave me some 8 of an and fentanyl. Now fentanyl is really powerful pain medicine. Just takes a smidgen to do the trick. They had me in a dental chair for the procedure, because if they had laid me back I would have suffocated. Anyway, the nurse, bless her, gives me the fentanyl and is watching over me with my mom, also a nurse. Apparently I started sliding out of the chair, and as they run to catch me I mumble, no wonder people steal this crap, then flake out. Fentanyl is a scary powerful drug. Medical student, on attachment with a stomach specialist, gastroenterologist, couple of years ago. Let me set the stage. 13-year-old kid in for a colonoscopy, sticking a tube with a camera at the tip up the butt, cause he's been having diarrhea and some blood. My friend, girl, relevant later, and I join in to watch, trying to reassure the kid. The doctor tries to tell him it's fine. He brings up the fact that the kid is a fan of World War II documentaries and says the father told the doc that the child spends lots of time on the computer reading up on World War II. I'm convinced otherwise, but nevertheless, kid calms slightly and agrees to lie on his side and open wide. So we begin. The kid is sedated, becomes drowsy, then in we go. What I see on screen can only be compared to the scene in SWF4 when they come out of hyperspace in the remains of Alderaan. The child, writhing in pain, starts mumbling. My friend and I swear he said laughed something and other strange words. And then, as my friend goes to comfort him, he screams, "Don't touch me W." I'm in no state to help, biting on my fist to stop laughing. It takes about 10-20 minutes and we're done. As we wheel the kid out, he raises his left arm and say Heil Hitler before going back to sleep. The end. Mein Führer, I can walk. I woke up in the middle of a neurologist trying to clip an aneurysm in my brain. I reached my hand up, grabbed the surgeon's hand and said, "You're hurting me." Several staff, including the anesthesiologist, screamed like a girl. The doctor asked me where the pain was and then practically shouted at the anesthesiologist to get her under. Afterwards the anesthesiologist came to apologize. He said it took 4 times the normal amount for a person my size, small, to stay out. The doctor told me I was crushing his hand with the probe in it and that it took everything he had not to jump and stab my brain with the probe. They had never had someone wake up in surgery before. That doctor needs a huge freaking raise, having your patient grab your hand during brain surgery and not scrambling their brains. Dang. After waking up from sedation to get my wisdom teeth out, I asked the nurse, did you keep my teeth? Number. I really wanted to keep them. She kind of laughed. Why? Because I was going to sell them. They're worth money. My mother drove me home, and while I was waiting in the car while she ran into the gas station, I watched two ducks fight for what seemed like 10 minutes. I've never seen that before or again. I was 21. Right before surgery, while the doctor was making me count backwards from 10, I stopped and said, "No wait, I have to crap." At the time it seemed like the most horrifying thing for a 16-year-old girl to hear after waking up. I said what to him. He looked a bit like John Stamos. I am happy to say that I did not crap myself. That's really strange. In the 5 years that I have been an OR nurse, I have never seen anyone ask to count back from 10. That's a Hollywood thing. Not disturbing but silly. Me as a patient. Husband told me that during my emergency C-section for my firstborn I was really out of it, 27 hours of labor, and as my child made her first cries I started crying and said, "Oh no, it's a duck," and the whole busted out laughing and reassured me I had a baby, not a duck. This made me laugh. Not a doctor, but I think I accidentally insulted one once when under sedation. Years ago I smashed one ankle, but good. The hospital basically sedated me while they tried to align things and wait for me to get less shocky. I don't remember much of the afternoon at all. I do remember coming to just before surgery. There was this smiling man looking down at me. He cheerily chirped, as if he was explaining he'd be my waiter for the evening, "I'm Dr. Pinto and I'll be your anesthesiologist." I remember thinking, Pinto, like the bean. I think I said it out loud. I don't know. He must have been okay with it though. I came to pretty fast after surgery and didn't feel sick at all. He also gave me a shot in my hip so I didn't need morphine or any pain meds for hours afterwards. I'm sorry if I said you were a bean, Dr. Pinto. You're a great anesthesiologist, if that helps. That is more adorable than insulting. Can I flip this around and tell you about the most disturbing thing I heard from an anesthesiologist when I was a patient? I'd just given birth to my first baby and my placenta wouldn't budge, so I had to have it removed manually. Gross, I know. The anesthetist gave me an epidural and stayed with me during the procedure. It wasn't the happiest time in my life, giving birth and being separated so quickly from my son. Also having someone rummaging around my uterus. Sensing my upset, this anesthetist decided to cheer me up by telling me all about the lost children of Francoism. These were babies stolen from their mother soon after birth in hospitals. Oh, and did I know this went on into the 80s? He kept talking about for like a whole hour, going into great detail about the pain and anguish it caused the parents and the whole country. Babies spirited away without their mother's knowledge, they being told their child had died. Eventually I burst into tears and the surgeon told him to shut the heck up. He apologized and tried to make me feel better by saying it wasn't just in Spain, you know. These things happen all the time everywhere. I think he was a bit socially awkward and was just trying to make a connection. You know, me just having a baby and him having just read about stolen babies in the internet. I guess he thought I'd find it interesting or relevant, but still, it was pretty disturbing conversation to have with a patient. I'm not an anesthesiologist, but I have had to have several colonoscopies and have woken up during a couple. The first time I remember waking up and looking at the screen for the scope and I said, "Hey doc, that's not normal, is it?" Then I was out again. The second time I woke up again, looked back at the doctor while he was working the scope and said, "Hey, you didn't even buy me a beer." It seems like my body has a tolerance or something because it never seems to last as well as I'd expect. Likewise, the sedation I get seems very light and I seem to come round when the tube is up as far as it will go. I watch the video and fart. Not an anesthesiologist, but the patient. I was 10 and was getting local anesthesia for a procedure. I vaguely remember them asking me what I enjoy doing, and then me responding by serenading the entire operating room with Hannah Montana songs. Okay, you're adorable. Kind of the opposite for me. I was the one under sedation, as I was having my wisdom teeth removed. I remember that the room in which the procedure was done had a window that looked out over a small pond and there was a tall tree with a bird's nest in it. The doctor brought my mother into the room to stay with me immediately after the procedure. Well, apparently, as I'm waking up, still high as balls, I start giggling about how there are now 2 trees and 2 birds' nests. I rambled on about the nests for a little bit, when, out of the blue, I get really angry and yell, "That bird's a freaking bee." My Christian mother was mortified. My personal story, I got all 4 of my wisdom teeth taken out. When I started to come to, my whole mouth was numb and puffy. I don't remember if it was me or an assistant, but when the gauze came out of my mouth completely red from blood, I freaked out. Not because it was bloody, but because I thought it was my tongue. I don't know if I thought I bit it off or they cut it out, but I was convinced that it was my tongue. Clearly I was still out of it, and I'm happy to have my tongue still. Okay, I was the patient here. I had to get my gallbladder removed, and as they were wheeling me into the surgery room all drugged up, I started to cry and said, "I'm gonna wake up with my lips stitched to someone's butthole." We had a normal 20-something guy we were taking back for a routine day surgery procedure. We start hooking all the monitors up, give him some oxygen, and start giving him some feel-good meds before we go all the way off to sleep. He starts laughing maniacally and in a deep crazy voice says, "My name is Satan and I am going to kill you all," and then starts laughing some more. We couldn't get that guy off to sleep fast enough. Woke up as a normal guy too. Weird as heck. This should be closer to the top. My wife works GI, colonoscopies. Actually just shared this one with me yesterday. Guy comes in and is about to go under. Everyone that works in my wife's clinic is female. Right before the dude goes under, he says to think, "Some people pay big money to get 3 pretty ladies to do this. Here I am getting it for free. Today must be my lucky day." Colonoscopades. I was the patient. I got my wisdom teeth out and I had twilight sedation for the procedure. I remember drifting in and out of consciousness, and I really wanted the doc to know that I was awake for it. I managed to ask for a pen and paper because my mouth was full of gauze. I wrote, "I woke up during the procedure" on the paper. I showed it to the nurse and my mom. They had no idea what it said. I was irate. I wrote very, very carefully, so I did it again. Still, nothing. Years later, I found the scrap of paper. My mom's a mild hoarder. It was complete gibberish. Made up letters and words that had no meaning. Obligatory me, not a doctor, and it's more what I did. I had 2 herniated discs, L5S1, and needed a microdiscectomy. They go in and cut off a piece of bone so they can get to the spinal cord, which they need to push aside to get at the hernia. However, I had been suffering with this for 3 years and so it was quite inflamed. I'm told that it was so irritated and sensitive that one touch had my leg kick backwards and nail an observing nurse in the face. They had to hold my limbs down in order to continue. Haha. A few months ago I had to have surgery, and the day after my doctor told me I had asked him to marry me and that I had said he was very handsome, and that I wanted him to be the father of my children. This doctor was a tiny old man. We had a good laugh about it when he told me. Not anesthesia, but nitrous oxide. I was getting a tooth extracted and I, under the influence, thought it would be hilarious to call out for my doctor while the nurse was tending to me. Punt was the name, so I began to call out Dr. Poon while the nurse and my mother lost it laughing. I was the patient. It had slap, sever labral anterior to posterior, tear surgery on my left shoulder. I came out from the surgery speaking only Spanish. For about an hour, my wife, who speaks no Spanish, is trying to figure out what I'm saying. None of the nurses spoke Spanish. For about an hour I understood what they were saying in English, but for the life of me could not utter a phrase in English. I was coming out of anesthesia after getting my gallbladder removed. I remember the nurse asking me to open my eyes. Instead, I violently and repeatedly shook my head back and forth for a good minute, and then whispered, "I might have eaten a puffer fish," still refusing to open my eyes. I had to go in for a colonoscopy, and I guess I told the good-looking nurses that I can't believe they have to look at butts all day. I also told them when I was coming to that they were as pretty as my wife. Needless to say, I was released pretty quickly. I'm just glad my brain threw my wife in that sentence, or I would have never lived it down. Thanks, brain. Not an anesthesiologist, but I woke up following surgery with my wife next to me. talking calmly, and I basically started freaking out that she wasn't my wife. She thought I was kidding at first and was laughing, but then had to calm me down because it was very real for me. The context of her words made me think it was her, but her voice was like a completely different person's voice. Patient here. Apparently when I got my wisdom teeth removed, they were all 4 impacted. I had what was probably the biggest, most awkward boner of my life. I remember losing control of everything, but still being awake as they were having me count down from 100. I made it into the 60s, and by that time, I was completely erect and very self-conscious. The anesthesiologist was like, sounds like we need to up the dose, and that was the last thing I remember. What must have been 30 seconds to a minute later, I wake up with a mouthful of gauze, and 3 nurses standing around giggling and blushing. I looked down and all I could say was, "I can't believe you're still here," only since I had that mouthful of gauze. They all asked me to repeat it, and I did, about 3 times, while pointing at my dong. The anesthesiologist finally stopped me and helped me stand up, adjust myself, and stumble out to meet the world. Coincidentally, that was the very last time I went to that dentist. I was sedated a while back to get some teeth pulled, and my mom has a video of me coming out of it. She asked me if I was still feeling the anesthesia, and I looked over at her and said, "Dude, I'm freaking baked." That was how my mom found out I smoked weed. Patient here. While waiting on the table for a general, I received some sort of pre-op sedative. The nurse says, "What do you do for a living?" I say, "Maths teacher." She says, "Oh, I was never very good at maths." I just blurted out, "Great, you're going to freaking kill me because you're too stupid to calculate ratios properly." Then I went out. "Because you're too stupid, teacher." Medical student a few years ago on anesthetics placement was wheeling patient from theater to recovery with the consultant. He was still asleep but just starting to rouse. Consultant starts asking me how Dropbox works, so I start to explain the concept when the patient starts mumbling, with his eyes still closed, something that I didn't quite catch. "Excuse me," I said as I leant in closer. "Dropbox is really good," he muttered with eyes still shut. Another one. When you want to rouse patients from anesthesia, you start by shaking their shoulder gently and asking them to open their eyes. This other woman had her eyes shut but shook her head vigorously when the anesthetist asked her to open her eyes. Like, how delicate is that line between consciousness and unconsciousness? Not so much of a line as a big kind of smoosh. Not a medical professional, but the patient. My first time being sedated put under was when I was 28 and had my wisdom teeth out. We found out the hard way that while propofol does make me temporarily immobile and feel no pain, it also does not knock me out. The oral surgeon didn't believe me until I was able to repeat back to him the conversation he and the nurses had had about a third party during my extractions. To them I looked conked out, but my brain was still 100%. It turns out my grandmother, with whom I share a blood type, if that matters, has the exact same reaction to anesthesia. She was fully conscious through knee replacement surgery, and took her surgeon to task in recovery for calling her a fat cow, among other things. Med student here. We had a patient who had just been sedated for a colonoscopy, and the anesthetist was helping roll the patient onto their side. Before getting a colonoscopy, you need to get bowel prepped, where you take some drinks and it gives you horrible diarrhea to help clean out the pipes. So it's not unusual for patients to have a bit of leftover poop around their butts, which occasionally flick onto the theater staff as they try to roll or reposition the patient around on the bed. This guy, on the other hand, lets out a massive shart and completely covers our anesthetist, who wasn't wearing a face mask either. His colonoscopy report: completely inadequate bowel prep. Before I went in for my surgery, my anesthesiologist walked in and said, "Good morning, I'll be your bartender today." Got me to chuckle. Doctors with decent bedside manner are so rare today. AWW. I have a soft spot for anesthesiologists. Mine held my hand because I was crying, then knocked me the frick out. While I was working at a summer camp for my 3rd year, I had to have an appendectomy. The nurses were concerned when I kept demanding to know WHO's my kids. Where are they? I can't see them. Man, I loved that job. I'm an all nurse and was taking care of a patient in PACU after surgery. As he was waking up, he told me I reminded him of his ex-wife. I asked him in what way. His response, "She has a nice rack too." I had to get a colonoscopy at 19 years old, and just as I was about to go under, I looked at the doctor and asked, "Doc, did you just wake up one morning and decided you wanted to look at butthole all day then passed out lol?" When I met the anesthesiologist prior to a spot of emergency brain surgery, he was explaining what he'd be doing. My husband saw me grin like a fool and say, "It's okay, I know what you do, Zog bless morphine." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.